Shalom, brother and sister truth seekers. I wanted to do a quick video about when Stellarium's projection of the Equinox event is to occur for 2024 in March. Um, we've been collecting a lot of straight line data over the years, and I mean, there's just been a lot of claims made over the years, and I mean, at some point I jumped in and was like, these are some big claims. I gotta pull the sundial out and be diligent and test all things and see what's going on. Some people were saying the solar year was longer or shorter than it was, and so I mean, there were questions that there were claims being made that needed to be tested and proved out. So I mean, this this journey of trying to prove out what modern science may be telling us began. And I mean, it's just been one step at a time. And so, I mean, last year was one of the first years where we had so many people collecting sundial data around the world where it was possible to actually pretty closely pinpoint where the Creator's international dateline landed. And from all the data that was collected, to the best of our interpretations, it looked like the international dateline, the Creator's international dateline, the beginning and end of that solar cycle, the first person to view that straight line was here in like the central United States, approximately. And then for the following fall, the first person to see the straight line looked like they lived kind of a little bit to the west of the west coast of the United States. They were up here in British Columbia, Canada, somewhere. So I mean, just extrapolating on this data, it looked like the first person to see the straight line in the spring of 2024 would be somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, just off the coast of Australia. That's what the data is projecting. So it kind of seems like we have people with sundial data with sundials collecting data this year in Australia. So we'll hopefully uh, we'll see a good confirmation of whatever the case may be. But people in New Zealand and people in Australia. But the question has been coming up, and I know people want to know, how can we correlate this amazing phenomenon, the straight line phenomenon, to any data that is being put out by NASA and Stellarium? And in the past, I've been really skeptical of the data put out by NASA and Stellarium. I've just needed to prove it for myself. And so I mean, this equinox moment that NASA claims that the sun crosses the celestial equator in a moment of time. And so it's not something that, like with the straight line pattern that I've seen over the years, like the sun, let me see if I can pull this. So there are three patterns that you see with your sundial when you're doing your sundial, and you can see them here. This middle line, this zero grid line, is the celestial equator. And then depending on what time of year, if you're collecting shadow data with your sundial, you're going to see these flipped curves. You're going to see this smiley face above, or you're going to see a rainbow below, or around the equinox, on the equinox line, you're going to see the straight line. So Stellarium and NASA and modern science seem to claim that the sun is going to cross right in a moment of time. But the thing is, with the sundials we're seeing, it appears like the sun is following the celestial equator for like close to 36 hours, it seems. And so the thing is, like, it seemed if the sun was following this curve down here, and if it truly switched in a moment of time, if it crossed this line and went up to these curves on the same day in the same moment, I would expect to see like an S curve. It would, or like a mixed curve. It would be like this curve up to this point when it crosses, but then it would be this curve for the second part of the day. And to date, over the, I don't know, 5 to 6 years of me doing this and the many hundreds of people, data sets I've seen, I have never seen anyone get a double curve like that. It's always either one of these curves, the straight line, or the flipped curve. So anyway, I mean, I just haven't paid much attention to what modern science and Stellarium have been saying over the years. But this year, I mean, now that we're starting to get a pretty good idea, oh, wrong button. Where's my thing? a pretty good idea of where this the Creators International Dateline might be tracking, I decided to take a look again at Stellarium to see what Stellarium was saying. And at a first glance, let me see if I can explain this. So, and I'm not gonna show you all the calculations and stuff. I already found the spot where the sun crosses the celestial equator, and I've just got it pulled up here so we can look at it. Uh, I can, if there's a question of how to get to this point in Stellarium, we can talk about that in the comments or another video. But so anyway, on this map, what I determined was when you click on the sun, it gives you the coordinate data of the sun, and it's this 0 right here, this one that I'm circling, that corresponds with this 0 grid line. And the simply it was just running the clock time by date and then by hour to see when is the exact moment that the sun is going to cross over that line. And so I had to jump around on the map, but eventually I found out that the sun was crossing over that celestial equator when it was over this, what is this, the latitude line right above Australia. And so, at a first glance, I think I've had some video discussions on this lately. At a first glance, it looked like what that was. At first, it was kind of. I have gone back and forth on this. But my first thought was like, oh, that's pretty close. Like the data we were projecting, like it really looked like people who see the straight line, if it would be here. So, I mean, the first people to see the straight line would be like New Zealand or Australia. So it seemed like that was a pretty close correlation. And so Stellarium and I think timeanddate.com are showing this quote unquote equinox moment right over like central Australia, right over the middle of Australia. And so my first thought was, yeah, that's close, but then I guess I got into another discussion in the middle of a video and a meeting, and I was just trying to think of it real fast, and it didn't seem to make sense because I don't know if I was thinking about what Stellarium is showing us here correctly, but my first thought was, well, okay, Stellarium is showing us the moment that it crosses the celestial equator. So if they have that right, then in order for someone to see the straight line, they need to see the sun cutting that path across the celestial equator all day. So a person living here, they would need to see the sun out here to the east for their sunrise data points for the straight line test. So if the sun was only hitting the celestial equator here over Japan, or some middle of Australia here, then that would be sunrise for somebody over in India, is what it looked like. Okay, so that was where I kind of left things, and that's what I kind of thought about it. But a brother in South Africa contacted me and pointed out something interesting that I think is worth considering, and he wanted to remain anonymous, but I'm very thankful for the iron sharpening iron. He's a very passionate brother about this Sundial stuff, and he's been collecting for a few years now, and he has a nice setup where he's been tracking, and he will be tracking this year. But one of the things that he said that got me thinking was maybe it's possible I am misunderstanding what Stellarium is telling us, or there's some slight little, there's something to consider here, and potentially maybe there is something to look at here. Maybe there is a correlation between what Stellarium is showing us and what we're getting with our straight line data. And that is this. Okay, so they're showing us that the moment the sun crosses the celestial equator, it's going to be solar noon position over Australia. So what this brother in Africa suggested was, he suggested that the sun is actually, like, what Stellarium is telling us is like the midday moment. Like if the straight line pattern occurs, that he was thinking like it's they're getting like the they're getting the middle of that first day. I don't know how to explain it, but like, there would be 6 hours to the right and 6 hours to the left of daylight time, and it's it's just the way we're looking at this, like, and so what the implications of this are is he was suggesting that perhaps the sun is just getting so close to the celestial equator that it is doing that S curve that I mentioned earlier, like, and maybe it is crossing the celestial equator in a moment of time, but when it gets so close to the celestial equator, we can't perceive it with our sundials. Like, it looks like a straight line, but it's really not there until the actual moment that it is there, which is midday of the first day that the first person to see the straight line. So in order for the first person to see the straight line, again, they would be looking at sunrise 6 hours ish before. The sun would have to be rising to the east. So, I mean, it's complicated to explain, to think about. I mean, this stuff is. I mean, it's simple when I think about the straight line, and I don't want to make things complicated. Like, I want to think about, like, Moses in the desert with that rod, and he sets it up in the desert and the flat land. And with a sundial that tall, I think it would be very easy to see the straight line. And, like, what this brother in Africa was suggesting about maybe it comes so close to the celestial equator, but it does actually only cross in a moment of time, but we just can't perceive it with our small sundials. Well, one thing somebody could do to test that someday is, if they live in the flat land, use a really tall sundial and see if you can actually perceive, is it actually straight, even like with a very large sundial? Like, is there a slight curve? Can anyone ever see, was there a double curve? Because I mean, right now that's only theory. That has never been proved. The S curve, I have never seen that in anyone's data. I have never seen the straight line test or this S curve, like, in modern science's tools of measuring these things. Like, I don't know of any telescope or any sundial device that they have that does this straight line test. So, I mean, it's a theory, but I mean, whatever the case may be, if it's slightly below the celestial equator and we can't see it, or if it happens to get on the celestial equator and ride it, the thing that is definitely true is there is an amazing phenomenon where everyone on Earth has the opportunity to see the straight line from morning to evening, like, and everyone has that opportunity, that daylight portion of time, to see that. But the interesting correlation, just to wrap this up, just as food for thought, just as like an additional potential witness, I would never stop using a sundial if I could avoid it. I know some people do want to rely a little too much on NASA and modern science and all this, and I don't recommend that we just totally throw sundials out the window, especially if we actually live in a zone close to where the Creator's International Dateline is going to land. But judging on the pattern of the data we've collected and everything, I think it could potentially help to be a witness to to help give us a ballpark of what's going on. So again, to summarize all this, it looks like potentially what I am seeing in Stellarium, and I believe timeanddate.com as well, they show the quote-unquote equinox moment happening right over Australia. But what I think this is showing us is actually the solar noon position of the first person who sees the straight line, potentially. So what that means is the sun is actually going to start cutting the straight path out here, approximately 6 hours to the east. So just wanted to mention that as food for thought, because I felt kind of guilty in the past couple of videos. I talked about, like, oh, Stellarium doesn't have any correlation whatsoever. It makes no sense. Like, someone in India would be seeing it, and we know that's way too far. Like, it should be someone here. But maybe I was misunderstanding what Stellarium is trying to tell us. Like, and without getting too much into the minutia, I mean, I knew this looked close, but I didn't quite know what exactly they were saying. Because I've never seen anyone to prove what these softwares are showing. I've never seen anyone be able to prove that with a measuring instrument. Like, can someone actually show that they're seeing these two curves in one day, and that it's not actually doing this special amazing phenomenon where it's riding the celestial equator? Anything's possible, but in any situation, just as food for thought, I do think it's potentially something to consider, that when you look at this data from Stellarium, realize it might be showing you the solar noon position of the first person to see the straight line on at the beginning of the year, or on the equinox event. So that would mean potentially the sun's rising out here to the east, and that looks ballpark. So we'll just have to see what happens in the next week or two. But I wanted to mention that as food for thought, because I felt a little bad. Like I said, this was just nowhere in the ballpark, but it actually looks potentially like it might be in the ballpark, and something to keep an eye on in the future. So please let me know your thoughts. If you have any, shalom, and may Abba bless you as you continually seek out his truth in love with a pure heart.